The wind carried dust like whispers, dry and thin, sifting over the cracked earth as if trying to bury the memory of all who walked it. She moved slowly, bare feet sinking into powdery soil, each step a silent act of endurance. A threadbare shawl clung to her shoulders and held the baby against her back. The child didn't cry anymore. That scared her more than anything. The prairie was a vast, indifferent sea. No trees, no shelter. Only a lone fence line snaking to nowhere. Her eyes flicked up toward the sun, a cruel disk bleeding orange into the sky. Night would fall soon. And with it came the kind of cold that broke bones from the inside. She used to have a name.
Once.
Spoken softly by a husband now buried under wild grass and a crooked wooden marker far from any church ground. The fever took him quick, and it took everything with him. The land they'd scraped together with calloused hands and prayer. The mules. The tools. The dignity. She reached the edge of the town just as the first stars dared to pierce the failing sky. It was the kind of town built on stolen land and silence, where women wore pressed skirts and watched her from behind lace curtains, pretending not to. A lantern flickered outside the saloon, golden light reflecting in puddles where horses had pissed earlier. Men laughed inside, loud, careless, full of meat and money. She didn't pause there. The general store had turned her away days ago. The preacher's wife had offered a jar of apple preserves and a prayer, then locked the door behind her. There was nothing left to sell but herself, and even that was complicated. In this part of the world, a black woman's body was too often treated like currency already spent. The baby shifted weakly, a dry rustle of cloth and breath. She closed her eyes, pressing a cracked palm to the infant's back. Still warm. Still breathing. She stepped onto the porch of the largest house in town, a pale structure with clean windows and silence behind them. Its owner was known by name, but never by grace. A man who owned cattle, land, and the law. He didn't need to advertise. Everyone knew he bought things. Even people. Her knuckles tapped the door just once. It opened before the echo faded. He was tall, pale, and sharp. Not in features, but in presence. Like a knife wrapped in white linen. He looked her over, expression unreadable, then tilted his head. "No one comes to my door without need," he said. She didn't lower her eyes. "I'll work. Work's paid in coins, not pity." "I'm not asking for pity." She shifted the baby slightly, revealing the bundle more clearly. "Just food.
Shelter."
"He's hungry." "You'll leave him here," the man said flatly. "He stays with the wet nurse. You sleep in the shed. You work where I say when I say.
You don't speak unless asked.
You don't leave until spring thaw." There was no hesitation in his words. Just a contract wrapped in cruelty. She felt her knees begin to shake, not from fear, but the weight of choice. There was no offer of pay. No mention of name. No future. She thought of her husband's voice, low and warm, once singing lullabies. Of the way he used to press his lips to her temple after long days in the fields, saying, "One day, we'll leave this dust behind." But the world had stolen that promise. And now this man, this house, was the only thing standing between her baby and the cold grip of death. She nodded once. It felt like slicing her own throat. The door creaked open wider, and he gestured her in. A woman emerged from a side room, pale hands outstretched for the child. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then slowly unwrapped the shawl and passed the baby over. The warmth left her back. Her arms felt empty and wrong. She tried to meet the infant's eyes, but he had already turned inward, like he knew he was being passed between worlds. They took her to a small shed behind the main house. It smelled of rust, smoke, and old hay. A cot with a moth-eaten quilt. A dented pail. A cracked window that showed nothing but horizon. No firewood. No light. No warmth. She sat on the edge of the cot and felt something in her chest collapse. Not break. Just fold in on itself, like paper made soggy with grief. The silence pressed in heavy. In the absence of the baby's breathing, her own heartbeat became unbearable. She didn't cry. Tears were a luxury. Moisture she couldn't spare. Instead, she reached into the folds of her shawl and pulled out the only thing she had not surrendered, a small button from her husband's coat. Smooth and black, warm from her skin. She clutched it in her palm, curled like a prayer around it. The wind outside shifted, rattling the loose boards like bones. Somewhere beyond the house, a dog howled. And then, even that sound disappeared. She lay back on the cot and stared through the window, where the stars burned like distant fires above a world that didn't care whether she lived or vanished. But she'd made her decision. She would work. She would endure. And come spring, she would take back her son, even if she had to burn the whole place down to do it. The morning came without welcome. Cold crept through the gaps in the shed walls, biting at her fingers as she dragged herself up from the sagging cot. Her body ached in places that hadn't hurt yesterday, and hunger tugged at her belly like a cruel hand. Outside, the land was still, frosted edges curling over fence posts and dead grass. The ranch had an unnatural quiet about it, like it breathed through clenched teeth. She knew without being told where to go. A heavy-set man with a red face and tobacco breath met her at the tool shed, handed her a rusted hoe, and pointed to the gardens behind the stables. His words were few. Asterisk, you dig. You don't stop. You don't talk. Asterisk. The soil was reluctant. Frozen near the roots, dry on the surface. Every swing of the hoe sent vibrations into her arms. But she didn't stop. The others watched her at first from doorways, behind barrels, through windows. Shadows wearing skin. It wasn't until midday that one of them approached. A tall woman with deep copper skin and silver-threaded braids stood at the edge of the garden, her eyes unreadable, arms folded beneath a thick shawl. Her movements were slow and rooted, like the land itself had shaped her. "You're the new one," the woman said. She nodded, too tired to speak. "They let you see the baby?" "Once." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's more than most." She returned to digging, but her heart pounded louder than her tool. She wanted to ask, asterisk, most what? Asterisk, but fear pressed her throat closed. The woman didn't linger. She turned without another word, her steps whispering over frost-covered weeds. Later, while hauling buckets from the pump, she saw the stable boy. No older than 15, narrow shoulders under a coat 2 sizes too big. His face was marked, burned scars crawling up one cheek like tree roots.
He didn't speak.
Just lifted his end of the bucket with a silent nod. They moved together in a rhythm that didn't need language. Water sloshed. The rope creaked. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorted and kicked in its stall. The boy glanced at her once, long enough to make her feel like he saw something deeper than her calloused hands. Inside the main house, the air shifted. The master's son had returned. She heard it first through whispers, servants hurrying, fresh linens aired out, a bottle of brandy polished on the mantel. He had been away for years, boarding school, someone said. Someplace east where money made everything smoother. When she saw him, he stood out not because of his clothes, but because of the way he looked at the land. Like it disgusted him. His hair was too neat, his boots too clean. But his eyes, that pale, stormy color that never settled, drifted too often to the edges of the property, to the places where the help lived. Their eyes met once, just briefly. No words passed, but something flickered. Recognition? Curiosity? She wasn't sure. The baby was brought out once a week, as promised, swaddled and silent in the arms of a woman who never smiled. She held out her hands like she was asking for fire. Her baby barely stirred. The child's eyes were distant, used to other arms, other milk. She held him for only 5 minutes before he was taken again. One morning, while scrubbing the floorboards of the front porch, she overheard voices behind the parlor window. The rancher's deep growl, the son's colder, brittle tone. "You've built this place on bones," the boy said. "And bones hold weight," the rancher replied. "You keep people like cattle." "They came with their hands out. I gave them work. You think they'd be better off out there?"
A pause.
Then, the black one, with the baby, she offered herself. No one forced her. She didn't have a choice. No one ever does. The words lodged in her like thorns. She scrubbed harder, tears stinging the corners of her eyes, though her face remained stone. The woman with braids, who they called only Mags, found her that night by the well, hands raw and shaking. Mags didn't ask questions. She handed her a cloth soaked in salve that smelled of pine and crushed bark. "This place breaks people," Mags said, her voice low. "You bend or you break. But sometimes you learn where to lean." They sat in silence for a long time. By the second month, the routine sank into her bones.
Work. Scraps.
Sleep. Work again. But she learned to listen, to the way boots sounded when angry, to the creak in the stairwell before a slap, to the way the house sighed when secrets moved through it. The stable boy, who never spoke, began to leave small gifts near her door. A piece of bread, a dull but intact spoon. Once, a drawing of a horse done in charcoal. She found herself smiling, barely, and whispered a thank you to the wind. Then one night, thunder rolled in from the west. The air thickened. The walls of the shed felt closer. She woke to a sound, a sharp cry, then silence. She stepped outside, drawn by instinct. In the dim glow of the barn lantern, she saw him, the stable boy, crumpled on the ground, back bleeding through his shirt. A man stood over him with a switch, red-faced and snarling. One of the overseers.
Drunk.
She didn't think. She moved. Threw herself between them, catching the next swing on her shoulder. The man reeled, raised the switch again, then stopped. The master's son stood in the doorway, silent and still as death. His voice came low and firm. "That's enough." The overseer sneered but lowered the whip. The boy trembled. Blood darkened the hay beneath him. "I'll handle it from here," the son said, voice unreadable. When the man finally left, stomping curses into the night, the son crouched beside the boy, touched his shoulder gently, then turned to her. "You should have let him go." "I couldn't." The silence between them wasn't empty. It pulsed with something like understanding.
"I saw what you did," he said.
"Back there, with the whip. I've had worse." That's the problem. She didn't know what to make of him. His father's blood, yes, but not his father's eyes. There was guilt in those eyes. Rage, too, but something else, something breaking. "I'm sorry," he said. Then he left, taking the boy with him into the shadows. She stood alone, the lantern flickering behind her, the night heavy with wet wind. The baby hadn't cried for days. But somewhere deep inside her, something else began to stir. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was something harder. Resolve. The thaw came late that year, dragging spring in like a wounded animal. Mud sucked at boots, rivers swelled with meltwater, and the wind still bit, though the sun lingered longer each day. The earth smelled different, rich, wet, alive. But the house remained cold. She had grown used to her work by then, lifting, hauling, mending. Her back no longer screamed, only whispered. Her hands, once cracked and bloody, were now hard as bark. The bruises beneath her skin were older than the frost line. But the worst injury came when she held her son, and he no longer reached for her. He looked through her, like she was a memory he couldn't place. The wet nurse always hovered nearby, her perfume sour and sweet, like overripe fruit. The baby, her baby, cried more now. Not from hunger, but something quieter. Something deeper. Like he, too, knew something was wrong but couldn't name it. She began watching the house from the fields, mapping its rhythm. When the windows flared with lantern light. When the dogs were let out. When the back stairs creaked. Her mind, once dulled by grief and work, had sharpened into something thin and dangerous. The master's son, he came and went. Sometimes with letters, sometimes with packages wrapped in oilcloth. He watched her work from the veranda, cigarette burning slow between his fingers. Their eyes met more often. Not with desire but inquiry. One evening, he approached her near the well. Not like a master, not like a savior. Just a man who had questions. "Why haven't you run?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "Where would I run to? There are towns south of here. Places where men like my father don't matter. They matter everywhere." He nodded slowly, as if hearing it for the first time. "I could help," he said. She turned toward him then. Her eyes didn't plead. They challenged. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Just stared at his boots like they held secrets. "My mother was like you. Not in color, but in cage." That surprised her. Not the words, but the honesty. There was something cracking in him. Something long buried, pushing its way to light. Later, she found a small cloth bundle hidden behind the woodpile outside her shed. Inside, 3 biscuits, a folded map, and a sliver of iron that might pass for a blade. No note. Just quiet hope, pressed into flour and parchment. But she didn't run. Because her baby didn't come with her when she left. Mags warned her again. In that way she had, without sound or judgment. Just a glance, a shared silence, and once a single sentence. "Storm's comin'. The kind that don't blow over." She understood. Something had shifted. The overseers were drinking more. The master had taken to locking his study. Even the dogs seemed nervous, pacing the yard with hackles raised. One night, the boy, burn-scarred and silent, slipped her a folded scrap of paper under her dinner bowl. A simple charcoal sketch. Her baby, cradled in arms not her own, mouth open in a silent scream. She found her breath lodged in her throat. That night, she crept from the shed long after curfew. The moon wore a thin veil, like a mourner. She moved barefoot, silent as regret, toward the window of the nursery. She saw him, her son, lying stiff in a crib too fine for his blood. The wet nurse dozed beside the fire, snoring soft and shallow. The child's eyes were open, staring into dark. She pressed her palm against the glass, desperate to feel something, anything, return through the cold pain. A movement behind her. She turned fast, too fast, and saw the master. He wasn't dressed for sleep. His coat hung open, gun at his side. "You think this place is yours to escape?" he said, voice like ice cracking under weight. "You think a map and a biscuit buy freedom?" She didn't answer. She knew silence was stronger than begging. He stepped closer. "You sold yourself. You were nothing when you came here. You're still nothing. But now you've got something I own." The words slid over her like oil on fire. Rage didn't show on her face. It settled in her gut, coiled and patient. "I bore him," she said. "He's mine." "You bore him because you were desperate. That doesn't make you worthy. That makes you weak." From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. A figure in the shadows, near the barn. Mags?
The boy.
Maybe even the son. She couldn't tell, but she felt the air change. The master stepped closer. "You think pain gives you rights?" "No," she said softly, "but it teaches you who you are." He raised his hand, slow and deliberate. She didn't flinch. Behind him, a voice rang out, not loud, but sharp enough to freeze time. "Put it down, father." The son stepped forward, revolver in hand, face pale as the sky before lightning. The master turned slowly, the fury in him brittle now. "You point a gun at your blood? I point a gun at what needs stopping."
A pause. Heavy.
Final. The master laughed, a short, cracked sound, and stepped toward his son.
2 shots.
Echoing like thunder across the prairie. One hit wood. One didn't. The old man slumped to the dirt, his breath already gone. Silence roared. She looked at the son, his hand trembling, gun lowered. His eyes met hers. I didn't know what else to do. She walked past him, back into the nursery. Her son was awake now. Really awake, eyes wide, small hands reaching toward her. She gathered him close, burying her face in the curve of his neck. He smelled like powder and milk and everything she was willing to burn the world down for. Outside, the sky was turning. Stormlight on the horizon. And for the first time in months, she smiled. Just barely, but enough. The prairie didn't bury blood. It remembered. By morning, the ranch had learned. Word traveled faster than hoofbeats. The master dead, his son holding the smoking gun, and the black woman with the baby pressed to her chest like salvation. No one said it out loud, but every eye that watched her walk toward the kitchen door said what mouths could not. Asterisk, she changed the story. Asterisk. Inside, the house had gone quiet in a new way. Not from fear. From waiting. The staff moved like they were balancing on a blade's edge. The overseers had vanished some time before sunrise, taking with them their liquor, their anger, and whatever loyalty they'd sold to the old man. Mags was nowhere to be seen, but her mark was left in a few small signs. Firewood stacked neatly, a pot simmering on the stove, bandages beside the crib. The boy, the one with the scars, stood in the hallway outside the study, arms folded, expression unreadable. He looked at her, then at the baby, then away again. She touched his shoulder in passing, and he didn't flinch. That was answer enough. The sun hadn't moved the body. He sat across the room from it, coat open, hands red to the wrist, gun resting on the floor beside his boot. His face looked older, cracked down the middle like dried riverbed. He didn't look at her when she entered, just stared at the hearth, where the embers had burned low. "I thought it would feel like justice," he said. She said nothing. "It doesn't." Still, silence. "I don't know what comes next." She stepped further into the room, her son tucked into the sling across her chest. "Then it's time to find out." He finally turned his head toward her. "You could take him now. No one would stop you. The wagons are yours if you want." She looked down at her son. He was sleeping, lips parted, one hand curled near her collarbone. So small. So warm. "I don't want wagons," she said. "I want roots." He frowned. "Here."
No.
"Not here. But I'll know the place when I feel the ground." He nodded slowly, the weight of choice beginning to settle into his bones. The sheriff arrived by noon, riding with 2 deputies and a preacher who smelled like sweat and firewood. He asked questions, but not many. The boy's version matched hers. The house spoke the rest: blood patterns, burn marks, the dent in the floor where a bullet had missed and memory lodged instead. The preacher stood over the body, lips moving silently, then turned to the son. "You staying?" "For now. There'll be questions." "There always are." The preacher looked at her then, eyes narrowing just enough to know the color of her skin mattered more than the story she'd survived. But she met his stare with steel, and he looked away first. By dusk, the body was gone, buried on the edge of the property with no stone, no name. Just dirt, wind, and the unspoken truth that the land had swallowed a tyrant. She packed that night. What little she owned fit into a flour sack, an extra dress, the drawing the boy had made, a strip of hide she'd once braided into a bracelet. The baby's blanket was already threadbare, but she wrapped him in it anyway. She found Mags by the barn, hammering nails into a busted fence post like nothing had changed. "You leaving?" the old woman asked, without looking up. "I think I have to." Mags nodded. "You're not the only one." She gestured toward the stable where others had begun gathering, quiet shadows with packed bags and wary eyes. The house wasn't theirs anymore. Maybe it never had been. But now it was a memory, and they were choosing something else. "Where will you go?" she asked. Mags smiled, faint and slow. "Where the wind don't talk so loud. Where my hands still matter." They embraced, brief, firm, with no promises. Then she turned to leave. The son stood at the gate, one hand on the post, the other holding out something wrapped in oilskin. Inside, a locket.
Silver. Worn.
Inside the locket, a drawing, a child's handprint smudged in ink.
"He made it," the son said.
"Said you'd know it was his." She pressed the locket to her chest, heart caught in her throat. "I don't know what I'll build," he said. "Build something better." He opened his mouth to speak again, but she stopped him. "Don't try to fix what your father broke. Plant new. Let it grow different." He nodded once. Then she walked. She didn't look back. Not when the gate creaked shut. Not when the wind picked up behind her. Not when her son stirred and murmured in sleep. They crossed the plains like ghosts slipping into morning. The land stretched wide and gold, painted in the blush of a sun not yet risen. Coyotes sang behind them. The stars above began to fade, one by one. She didn't know the name of the next town, but her feet carried her with certainty. Each step forward was a rejection of what had held her. Each mile, a kind of birth. Her son stirred again, eyes blinking open. He looked up at her and, for the first time, smiled. And in that smile, she found the promise of tomorrow. Not forgiveness, not peace, but the power to make both.